As the battle of words heats up between America and the DPRK, we'll be asking whether the US has a coherent and credible policy towards the latter. And after Chinese action films set box office records over the past 2 weeks, we'll be looking at the reasons for its success from the Chinese perspective. Did it tap into patriotism or nationalism, or was it just good entertainment? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. The DPRK and the US are playing chicken again. In the latest exchange, President Donald Trump escalated his threat on Friday, saying military options are locked and loaded. On Thursday, he said that maybe his previous warning to the DPRK wasn't tough enough. Exactly what happened this time? Here's a quick timeline of the development. Now, on July the 4th and 28th, Pyongyang tested 2 intercontinental ballistic missiles. On August the 5th, the UN Security Council unanimously imposed additional sanctions against the DPRK. On August the 8th, Donald Trump warned Pyongyang not to make any more threats against the US, or they will face fire and fury like the world has never seen. Just a few hours later, the DPRK said it was examining a plan to target its missile launch near Guam. One day later, Trump responded by saying his warning to the DPRK of fire and fury wasn't tough enough, and his administration would announce plans as early as the following week to spend billions more than it already has on missile defense. Now, looking back at the half year Trump has been in office, how has the administration's DPRK policy been developing, if indeed there is one? I'm joined in Chicago by Laura Schwartz, who is a former advisor to President Clinton, and in Beijing by Mr. Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to both of you. Now, Laura, first to you, what do you think is the meaning of what Trump has said just hours ago, that military options are locked and loaded? What did it mean, and is he really serious in what he's saying?
Well, I believe the president is serious in what he's saying because it's been backed up by the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, albeit in a different way. There's been a lot of hot rhetoric over the last few days coming from President Trump, much of it making a lot of Americans uneasy about the way that he's handling it, more like a candidate Donald Trump than a President Donald Trump, who does carry the force of the U.S. military and nuclear arsenal behind him. So you all of a sudden have this toned up rhetoric that we haven't seen before. Now, there are a small group of people that think that this is a good thing. The problem is with these two leaders, especially Kim Jong-un, you've got a madman with a nuclear miniaturized warhead and an ICBM that now can reach America. And so it's just ramping up the escalation. But America, and even Donald Trump said yesterday, wants to pursue talks. The State Department has said time and time again with the DPRK that their phone lines are open to talk. But we are also with a very ready military. We could preemptively strike, but more than anything, we would stop those missiles in action and try to use all of our war power in Japan, our cruisers and destroyers, to do as much as we could to prevent nuclear war. Yeah, well, Mr. Rong, let's take a look at the DPRK's response. Now, Pyongyang answered President Trump's threats with very specific ones. What is the DPRK's strategic intention here, for instance, saying they might have a plan, a military plan, by the middle of August?
Well, I think DPRK's responses to this this round has been much anticipated, though I think a lot of us, a lot of the analysts are expecting something like the launch of another ICBM or even the 6 nuclear testing. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, we are having a kind of war of words instead of that more or as well as provocative move. Even though I think a lot of people still are speculating that the nuclear testing, another launch of missiles or even nuclear testings would be possible. So this is a very, I think, tense and situation and very worrying situation, and I hope that the competition of who is to be more or mad or more crazy would not lead to a kind of eventuality that nobody wants to see.
What is China's response to this latest round of exchange of rhetorics, Mr. Rong? China said, China asked both sides to be more cautious. Does China believe that the possibility of war or military conflict or miscalculation is really higher?
China does not want to take any risk on this peninsula because this issue has direct bearing on the security and the stability of China and the region as a whole. So China has always made it very clear it does not want to see a war breaking out between either side or a kind of chaos or chaotic situation that would be served nobody's interest. So China has played its role and constructive role and make sure that the messages will be heard, and also I think its proposals and ideas would be sort of implemented in the sense that this situation, first of all, I mean, would not spray out of control, and but more importantly, we hope that the tension, there will be no escalation, and the tension will be died.
Yeah, Laura, there have been some statements of all kinds coming from the Trump administration. Donald Trump himself has posted about 100 tweets about the DPRK. Tillerson said in March that the DPRK must make concessions for talks to resume. Then in April, Pence was direct about military threats, saying the sword stands ready. In April again, Tillerson called for direct talks with Pyongyang, while on the same day, Trump says there is a chance they could have a major conflict with the DPRK. So by taking so many different positions and shifting between them, have we seen a policy, if not some kind of a policy forming over the past months within the Trump administration?
It's a very interesting question because you're right. A lot of the talk is at odds. Our Defense Secretary and State Department Secretary Rex Tillerson try to take the calm, strong, sober approach versus the more fiery one, of course, of Donald Trump. But it's very interesting. The United States has always looked at aggressive diplomatic resolution prior to this, and it's been ramped up because the program has succeeded in North Korea with the miniaturization of that nuclear warhead. But it's interesting, whereas we just had the sanctions passed last week at the UN Security Council, where everybody came on board, including Russia and China is now becoming more a part of the conversation, both in the Trump administration, as it appears, as well as among Americans through the media, because they are realizing that if China is able to really commit to these sanctions that they voted on last week, it will have a big impact. So when I hear Secretary Rex Tillerson speak and Donald Trump with his forceful words, they're not just talking to the DPRK. I think they're also trying to reach out to China as well. Yeah. There were 6 last rounds of sanctions. If this one holds, there could be a much better diplomatic end to this means than one of military action.
It's interesting. Let me pick up on that because so far, indeed, President Trump's preferred strategy seems to directly link China's role to the DPRK issue more than any of his predecessors. Basically, every time he talks about the DPRK or every other time he talks about the issue, China is there. Is this a tactic that is using Mr. Rong? For instance, because China's ambassador Liu Jie just recently reiterated that the US and the DPRK hold the primary responsibility to make things move in the right direction.
Well, I think certainly China has been, as a responsible sort of member of the international community, and we play a very constructive role in this process. But as Ambassador Liu made very clear that the issue itself is primarily about security. So it is really between United States on the one hand and DPRK on the other. And I think in the consultation between the of the UN Security Council about the adoption of this resolution, and China has always made it very clear that on the one hand, I mean, sanctions or measures that have to be taken that to make sure the DPRK should abide and follow the steps and messages that the international community particularly vis-à-vis its nuclear missile program. But on the other hand, I think sanctions are only means, not the end. So it has also be followed by dialogue. By the way, I think we have talked about many options. I think the Trump administration has made it very clear that, as always, at the previous administration, that all options are on the table, including military one. But in reality, history at least so far has shown that the only viable option is dialogue. So with the hope that issue, this is the only way that it can be resolved.
Yeah, Mr. Rong, for instance, in the past, President Truman, if our recollection is correct, also engaged in this kind of very fiery exchanges with a similar situation, and somehow that kind of heated words just don't seem to solve the problem. Do we see, or do you see, the possibility of the tension heating down instead of going up against everybody's expectations?
Yeah, the worry is really there. As you rightly said, that if you look at the history, particularly on this part of the region, in November 1950, when the Korean War broke out, and then there were also talk, very loose talk, response talk by President Harry Truman that possibly the U.S. would use the nuclear weapons. That caused a big sort of concern and worry, even from the U.S. closest ally, UK. So I thought that remarks and statement like that, certainly it makes sort of publicly, I mean, sounds it's good, but for the safety and the security of the region, and in the end, for the settlement of the issue, this does not work at all. And I only hope that that kind of game, who is more tougher, who is the toughest guy, would just end. And then
the problem right now, Laura, let me come to you now, is really who would appear to be weak first, right? I mean, you have already put yourself in the position where, you know, you're in a competition of who is talking tougher. Now, where does this lead to? How can anybody, you know, calm down first?
Yeah, you know what, I agree with Mr. Rohn. I mean, the aggressive diplomatic action is really the only way to solve this. The fighting back and forth, the ranching up of the rhetoric just makes it more likely that Kim Jong-un's going to go ahead and fire those missiles towards the U.S. territory of Guam. And that's not what we want to see happen. The United States militarily can protect Guam, can do everything to protect the allies, especially those in the short-range region of the DPRK. But it is through diplomatic talks, it's through the success of sanctions and coming to the table, of which, again, our United States State Department said, hey, you should take us up on that option, because if you go the military warpath, we're going to be forced to as well. And the President of the United States does not need congressional approval if the United States is provoked to defend itself. It would be different if there would be a preemptive strike, but there really is no need for that as long as we can have some moving ahead with the sanctions and some sort of dialogue. But right now, the DPRK has shown no interest in that route. So we'll see what happens in the next coming weeks. But minute by minute, this is changing. And again, Mr. Rohn is so right. The rhetoric, it's like these two men talking tough. But that's not how to solve problems between countries or nuclear proliferation.
No. But again, in 20 seconds, if you will, Laura, what do you see the chances of negotiation resuming if, you know, we're talking about closed-door consultations maybe possibly still going on, but how do you see the chances of real negotiations starting anytime soon?
Well, looking at Kim Jong-un, it doesn't look like they are, but we remain ready and steadfast to have that dialogue, to not just protect the people of South Korea, Japan, China, and beyond, and ourselves as well, but all of our allies in the world. They've got to get a solution to this, and we cannot tolerate a nuclear North Korea.
Yeah, well, let's hope that President Trump also is on the same page with that wish. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Laura Schwartz, a former advisor to President Clinton, and Rong Ing, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. And you have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back right after this. The The Chinese action film Wolf Warrior 2 has broken box office records, grossing already 4 billion yuan or over $600 million in just 2 weeks. While some viewers speak highly of the heroism depicted in there, others criticize it for being nationalistic. How do the Chinese people look at this movie and its surprising success in China? Patriotism, nationalism, good action, or combat scenes? For those of you who have not seen the movie, here's a short introduction to it.
Wolf Warrior 2 tells a story about a former Chinese soldier venturing into an African war zone to save hundreds of lives, including Chinese and African, from rebels and Western mercenaries. The film was shot over 10 months at locations both in China and overseas. Production involved over 1,000 personnel, including 2 special effects teams. Although its predecessor had been a huge success in 2015, the director took nothing for granted in making the sequel.
Actually, serial productions tend to be more challenging because people expect the sequels to be better. The first movie's success set very high standards, so I was under a lot of pressure making the follow-up. As a filmmaker, I consider it my mission to create good movies. Also, I want to let the audience to see the strength and character of Chinese people.
Continuing the plot about an elite soldier from Chinese Special Forces, Wolf Warrior 2 offers a realistic depiction of a modern battleground. In addition to over 100 motor vehicles, 12 military tanks and 2 helicopters were deployed for the production. Some 50,000 rounds of ammunition were also fired during filming.
For more on the discussion, I'm joined by Ai Li, an author and commentator and online celebrity, by Xia Peng, founder of Zhuomo Culture, an online startup focusing on English teaching, research and cultural exchange, and by Mr. Yang Qian, Executive Vice President of TIC Films Corporation. Welcome to all of you on the show. Mr. Yang, let me come to you first. First of all, how do you explain the intention of the filmmakers? Who do you think they made this film for?
Okay, actually, first of all, it's a Chinese language film, so it's definitely for the major target and the territory is in the China, so which is a Chinese the audience. So it's definitely it's for our territory in here.
How do you look at the reasons behind such a huge box office in the first 2 weeks? I mean, it's totally out of everybody's expectations.
Yes, actually, it's very outstanding and very exciting for it. And actually, in our film business, no one thought like that high the bill is. But for us, what we thought is multiple mutual reasons and to make it success. First of all, it's a great weekend to open the getaways to release in China, which is the summertime, and it's students take the vacations as well. So right now at this moment, this weekend, before that, there's not many of the films getting that high success, and the BO is pretty cold down for the temperature. So they makes the audience really gets to the want to hit go to the theaters, but that one makes it so it's been success. Second of all, the point is because it's definitely good quality Chinese action films, which is commercial action. So the good quality and good timing will be the major reason to make it success.
Let me come to the 2 guests here in the studio. Xia Peng, first to you. How did you react to this film when you watch it? What caught your attention?
Well, actually, first time I watched this movie is by the director edition. It's a long way before this is actually go premiere in the cinema.
Did you expect this to be such a hit back then?
No, because I'm a kind of like an action film goer. I love watching action movies, no matter.
And you thought the action here was not good?
Compared with those foreign production, I think it's still some distance to go.
So the box office record actually came as a big surprise to you?
It's a big surprise, but still, I think it's within the prediction, because within the August and July, this is a kind of like a protection month for the whole Chinese movie industry, that no foreign production is allowed. So that's why it's kind of like several films domestically made is going to cut the pie. So that's why I think for 5 billion or 6 billion whole market size, The Wolf Warrior 2 has done a great job.
Yeah. And Ailey, what was your take? Who do you think this film was made for, and how come it got such a hit?
Well, I think it's especially tailored for the Chinese audience. It's just for Chinese audience because look at all the casting of this film. We have one actor, he's a most famous Chinese comedian here in China, whose name is Yu Qian. Actually, I go to the movie for him. He's like a Chinese equivalent of Kevin Hart. So think about that. You have an action movie and you have Kevin Hart in it. It's very interesting. And we do have what we call Da Kang Shuji. It's also a very huge TV celebrities here. So it gets such a big reputation, but I don't think many foreign viewers will know who they are. So this film, I think, is specifically more made for the Chinese viewers, and just it's a huge success in business-wise, I would say. The propaganda is amazing. I mean, all those papers.
What do you mean by propaganda is amazing?
I mean here,
you mean the publicity?
No, it's not about. By here using propaganda, I don't think it's anything about political, like in gender or anything, right? It's just I would just say one thing. I think the director Wu Jin just really grabs the Chinese audience heart because, I mean, let's be honest. In China, we have the issue that we have so many young actors who are very good looking, but their acting skills are not that good. So a lot of viewers are really disappointed by that, and they just get really well paid when it comes to the movies. So Wu Jin really grabs that point, saying that, well, in my movie, I made it very clear. So if you want to be on my movie, you have to be really good at acting. You have to be really hardworking, and he really sold that point.
And he was doing that. He was living that. I mean, you could see that he really prepared very well, and he put all his heart and mind to it. But again, I find it slightly problematic with me that you say this movie is made just for the audience. Right now, there is nothing made just for which one particular audience.
It's true.
Half of the conversation is in Chinese, and then all of the conversation is subtitled and translated in English. So when they were making this film, have they not possibly have in mind the kind of possible reaction from Western viewers or people from Africa, Xiaopeng?
Well, I think this is another reason I think this is just a mediocre production, though it's a very huge business success. Because the depiction of the African people is very stereotypical. It's kind of like a poor slums, and peoples are very poor, disease, and war-torn African countries occupied by insurgents and mercenaries. So this is actually, if all these African people see this movie, they kind of like irritated, just as if we see James Bond taking the scene in Shanghai or in Hong Kong that depicted China in the way we don't want to see it. Well, it's not the real China that is representing.
Let's come to that in just a moment, but let me come again to Mr. Yang, who is in another studio. Mr. Yang, what is your take on the kind of possible reaction this movie might get from Western viewers or from viewers in Africa who probably think that, what, this is how Chinese people depict Africa?
Okay, actually, like I just answered the first question before, which is about this is a Chinese language film and the target audience is about Chinese. So for the Westerns, definitely they have to.
I mean, for the Chinese audience, the Chinese filmmakers also have to be responsible, right? They have to depict the right picture of Africa.
Yeah, and you know, because it's commercial films, basically it's just an entertainment thing. So actually right now it's internet age, there's many ways to knowing better about the Africa. So I don't think it's really one film can give the angle, says, okay, that's how the Africa looks like. So I don't think it's based on the one film could tell the whole thing.
Yeah, there is also the criticism from some Western media calling this a nationalistic action movie. Mr. Yang, what is your impression? Did you find yourself overly inspired by the kind of, love my country sentiment in that film?
All right. Actually, yes, there's some points, and of course, because the Chinese language film and translated by the English versions and with the subtitle things, so that's really picking sometimes with the words what the Chinese trying to tell to say. But it's entertainment, it's commercial films. I keep telling by the key terms, which is it's only the entertainment thing. So it's definitely what the filmmakers are trying to do is catch the audience eyes, which is in China territory. So that part for the whole films, I don't really think it's really getting touched for anything related to nationalism or something, you know. But of course, it's so do the American in the Hollywoods. They got lots of the types of films like that way too, to saying how the strong or powerful the American is. So and for medians, they're also trying to make some points out and also to catch them, those audiences they want to fall in with.
Yeah,
so they always have a mutual angles, but
Sure.
Let
me get the perspective from our guests here in the studio. Did you get any feeling that this movie was catering to the nationalistic sentiment of the Chinese audience, Eileen?
Yeah, a bit, but it's not the reason why this movie is so successful, because we all know here in China we do have several other movies at the same time catering to the so-called patriotism and nationalism here in China, but those movies didn't work so well. The box office of those movies just really tanked. I mean, they have even bigger reason to success if patriotism and nationalism is a key for being successful here in China. I think the movie is great. That's because compared with all the other Chinese movies nowadays available to watch, it's better in production. The acting is good, the plot line is very intense, and there are some punchlines, very interesting to watch. And the thing about depicting Africa in that way, well, think about it as a superhero movies. All the superhero movies have some flaws in that way. So it's you spend the money, you have a good time in the movie theater, and I think that's the reason why this movie is so successful. The nationalism part, yeah, it's part of the reason, but it's not all. I would say it's only maybe 20%.
Yeah, Xiaopeng, your take?
Well, I think this is from business perspective. I think Wu Jing has the right audience group, because if you depict China as one person to go to the cinema, then she's a female, aged 23 to 35, young urban professional from first-tier cities. But Wu Jing's production is actually very masculine. And then because of the Chinese movie market goes to the third and fourth tier cities and counties, so a lot of young men would like to go to the cinema to see it. So it's actually try to catch and capture all this outside of the traditional movie market, and that's why it's a very businessly successful, I would say.
But some people are also saying that this might not, very quickly, Xiaopeng, some people are saying this probably is not a good movie to be shown outside of China, because it shows a very masculine Chinese male image, and Chinese warships actually firing missiles into a foreign country. Very quickly, do you think that worry is warranted?
I don't think it's warranted. I think it's all about a stereotypical thinking. Because this is the first movie that China's warship is firing missiles in a foreign country to a foreign target.
Look at Captain America. Captain America is popular even here in China. I love Captain America, so it's fine. We need Captain China, Captain Australia, maybe Captain Yuan in the future, right? So I take it easy, just relax. It's a movie. I don't think it has that much issue.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Time is really limited. Many thanks to Ai, author and commentator, online celebrity, Xiaopeng, founder of Zhuomo Culture, an online startup focusing on English teaching, research and cultural exchange, and to Mr. Yang Chen, Executive Vice President of TIC Films Corporation. And as usual, here is my last point. My personal impression of this movie is that it's breathtaking. There are rarely dull moments where my attention drifted away, and with 3D effects, the action becomes even more real and fierce, as if I was personally caught in the fight or the crossfire. The love story that's woven into the action also give it a soft touch. So although there are scenes which could do with more sophistication on a political and cultural sense, I found myself surprisingly entertained in general. Maybe that's why it has been so popular in China. And that's all for this edition of The Point with Millie Shane. As always, follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.